and welcome to another episode of the Pawsome podcast. I'm Dr. Sam, and with me is the awesome Dr. Robert. Hey, Robert.
Hey, Sam, how are you?
I'm really good because I'm really excited because we're getting ready to go to a conference. So we're actually going to see each other in person. I can't wait.
I know, actually, I can't wait. That's gonna be a lot of fun. I've been to a conference in a bit, so
Me
when's the
neither
last one
because
you've
of
been
the
to?
pandemic. Everything got shut down. So we've been doing all of our veterinarians have to do like a continuing education. And so I've been doing all of mine remotely pretty much.
Yeah, I'm glad a lot of the veterinary agencies have been very lenient on being like, yeah, you can do more content online because trying to get your education requirements by going to conferences was not possible the last couple of years because of COVID.
Yeah.
So thank you
Yeah.
for that.
And they counted ones that were interactive. So like they were like I did ones where I could ask questions and it was happening live, but I wasn't in
Oh,
a
nice.
room. So I had a lot of those. That's what I did a lot of while,
Nice.
and I would do like a series of them too, which was kind of like almost like being in the distance learning class.
Mhm.
And so that was pretty cool. I've had some pretty good ones. Some really interesting teachers that I would be really interested to like see them in person because there's something really magical about going to these conferences and you're like, yes, I'm a veterinarian. I'm gonna do things. That's great. It gives you just all this like extra energy. I feel like, don't you think?
It re-energizes you, I think, to like fall back in love with the profession a little bit because sometimes I think we get a little drained like on the day-to-day stuff. So like going to a place where we get to learn, be better veterinarians, where everyone has the same passion again, you see that, and then you also get to have some fun in the evenings. It helps. So
This one's in
not mad
Vegas,
about
so
it.
we're gonna have a great time.
Yeah, I can't wait. It's gonna be a great time. So we can't wait to share that podcast with you in the coming weeks. But in the meantime, we're gonna talk about some fun stuff today.
Well, since we'll be traveling, how appropriate for what we're going to talk about tonight, which is
Nice
actually
segue.
traveling with your pets. And I am not, in this case, traveling with my pet. I am not bringing Gus with me to Vegas.
Well, that's a bummer because I'm sure he'd be thrilled to be around all the people.
I will tell you, though, that I have actually traveled to Vegas with a dog when I was moving from New York to LA way back when. I drove across country with my dog, Phoebe. And I
Oh,
wish that I would have had some of these tips at the time because traveling with a dog, whether it be by air, goes by train or by car, really does take some planning. So it's a really
yeah.
good thing. And a lot of times we have people like calling right at the last minute, asking for
Yes.
what do I do? I'm going to be driving, so the further ahead you can plan, I feel like the better.
Oh, 100%. I think there's so many things I think people don't realize until like they're on their way.
Mm-hmm.
That you need to just keep in mind before you do things like, again, whether it's traveling by train, car, in the country, out of the country. Even moving is important.
Oh,
Some
yeah.
states have
Mm-hmm.
restrictions when you're moving. So we'll get into a little bit of that today. I think probably a good place to start is, I guess, going within the country.
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest things is going to be your mode of travel, right? So I mean, if you're driving, obviously, you know your own dog, you know how they behave in the car when you go on a short ride, or if your cat too. That's the other thing too. I mean, especially a cat, you really should restrain them in the car. Shouldn't just let them
Yes.
out and about. It's dangerous for you. It's dangerous for them. Truthfully,
Mhm.
same things with dogs. It's better for them to be restrained. That being said, a lot of people don't, but there are ways to keep them in areas that will help them to stay calm and give them space and give you space for a long drive or something like that.
Yeah, especially the safety concerns too. There's even those car covers that go in your back seat that not only keep your car clean, super helpful when you have a hairy husky, but
Yes, or a
also
lap.
or a lap, or just a messy lab that likes to jump in the mud and then
Yeah,
share it with your car.
yeah, I know.
But it also protects them from going forward as well in a lot of cases. And some of them even have seat belts, like a seatbelt harness.
Yeah, like a
That
harness that will hold them in.
Yeah, it's actually a really good idea because I'll tell you, there's quite a few emergencies we have where dogs have come in after being like thrown forward because they don't have any type of protection preventing them from doing so. And a lot of times they'll have like traumatic brain injuries for a short time because of it.
Yeah,
So if you want on long drives in particular, it should be all the time, but definitely long drives to keep them safe with either, like you mentioned, a cage or some type of harness to keep them in place is a good place to start.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I think when it comes to like flying and stuff like that, which we can get more into, that's going to have rules that are outside of your control. So one of the biggest mistakes I think people make is whether they're going to go within the country or whether they're going to go outside of the country. Bear in mind what you were saying. Like, if you're going to go to Hawaii, you have to follow the rules. Hawaii is
Yeah.
very, very strict about their rabies being
Yep.
up to date because there is no rabies on the island. And so they're like extremely strict about it. It's almost like going to another country. And so,
Right.
I mean, they are, you have to get a health certificate and you can't just like, oh, swing by, hey, can I have a health certificate for my dog? It does not work that way. It takes a long time. It's a lot of manpower to actually do the back end of a health certificate before the part where then the veterinarian comes in, does the exam and all that, which I don't think you probably deal with very much in emergency. But
I've actually never done a health certificate, so I was
yeah.
going to ask you. I was like, it's like Sam. So why don't you tell our audience what's involved with the health certificate? Because I have no idea.
I mean, I think the biggest thing for me is I don't even know. Are you USDA? Like, are you still certified to do that stuff?
Probably
Like, do you
not.
give? No.
No, I was like, probably not.
Well, to do health certificates and stuff like that, you and in the state of Indiana, in order to give rabies vaccines, you have to be.
Yeah.
So that's different in every state. So there's no real reason for you to be if you're not doing health certificates and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then there's like, depending on what type of animals you examine, you get a different class. So I just have one for dogs and cats. I mean, I don't do exams on horses and livestock and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But for veterinarians to do that, you do have to keep a specific certification. And then the exam looks much like any other exam, just making sure they're healthy, safe enough for travel from what you can tell. If some dogs are very stressed when they travel or cats,
Yeah.
especially cats. So sometimes people will want medication and I'm totally fine with that. I have no
Yes.
problem prescribing medication. I think that makes a lot of sense instead of stressing them out. But I do know some airlines have rules about whether or not you can sedate your dogs before you fly with them. So
Really?
we really have, yeah, especially if they're going to be going in like cargo and stuff like that.
Okay.
Which that always makes me a little bit nervous because of all the horror stories that you hear. I feel like traveling with them in the cabin, that's fine. Although
Yeah.
I guess you hear a story every once in a while of something awful happening, but for the most part, if they're with you, you can keep an eye on them. But you shouldn't be
Mhm.
acclimating them to the like travel bag or to whatever crate you have them in like that week. Like they
Yes.
should be comfortable in this thing
Yes.
that they're going to be traveling
For
in.
God's sakes. Yeah.
Yeah. So like get them used to it, make it a happy place. I think in general, my rule of thumb too for like transporting your pet anywhere, the thing that they travel in shouldn't be something that only comes out when they go to the vet. Because then that
Mhm.
thing is always going to be like,
A negative thing.
oh, that thing. So I
Yeah.
tell people like have their crate out, feed them in it every once in a while. Like it should be a happy place for them. It shouldn't be just like the only time it comes is when they get poked and they're stressed and it's awful. You know what I mean?
No, I think it's great advice because how many cats come in and they've never seen their carrier before and they were miserable getting into it. Then as soon as they're in it, they don't ever want to come out of it because they're
Yeah.
terrified at the clinic. So very it's quite funny to watch because there was like, I had such a hard time getting them in
Get
there,
them
but now
in.
they don't
Yeah.
want to leave. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm worse than the carrier, so they'll
Yeah.
take the carrier.
Right,
So
exactly. But no, there's definitely medications we can give, or even like, pheromones, tips. There's things that we can do to help ease the stress of our pets, like when they're going either for short-term travel, long-term travel, moving, like you were saying. Um, so yeah, do what you can to keep them secure in a car. And then also if they have motion sickness, that's definitely something that you should be aware of
yeah.
too, because there's a few things you can do for
Yeah, even so there's some easy medications we can give them, which is great.
that.
On the sedation thing, just easy ones if you want to talk to your vet about it, like gabapentin for cats,
Oh yeah.
wonderful. Trazodone for dogs, also
Trazodone
wonderful.
works really well for cats too, actually. It's just
I've
harder
never
to give
used
it
it for
to them.
cats.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
does. Yeah.
Yeah. So there you go. So see things you learn. We're never done learning. But yeah, those are great options for a lot of our pets because they're nice and easy ways to relax them. And then when you do get motion sickness, we have other medications that they can help as well. So
Yeah, anything from
definitely.
Dramamine that you can find over the counter, sometimes that's all you need.
Mm,
But otherwise, like prescriptions, we have prescriptions that work awesome for
yeah.
motion sickness. And but you do have to also know the difference because there are some dogs that they throw up because they're stressed, not because they are technically troubled by the motion. So
Yeah.
it's a good idea also for you to do like a little bit of a test with them too. Like if we
Yeah.
gave you one of these medications, you shouldn't give it for the first time the day of travel. Because every once in a while you get a dog or a cat or somebody who A, it doesn't work for, it's not the right dose. Either it makes them
Yeah.
more sedate than you'd like, or it's not enough, or it has a paradoxical effect and they're jumping through the roof. And now you only found that out on your way to the airport. It's not a good time
And
to
yep.
find it out.
Or you have a 6 hour drive in front of you and you're like, this would be a long drive for them barking the whole time.
Right.
So it's definitely, I think, yeah, test driving, whether it's the carrier they're in, the medication they're on, or
Mm-hmm.
just in a car in general.
Oh,
Or
yeah.
like I said, don't take your first massive drive with them that's 12 hours long. If they've never been in a car before, because you will regret it very quickly.
Yeah.
So moral of the story, test drive, test drive, test drive.
Yeah, exactly. And
So
like, I think too, you don't have to worry, like if they've had an issue before, you can desensitize them to these situations if you give yourself enough time. If you give yourself 3 days, you may have some trouble. But there's some
yeah,
really good, like, positive reinforcement videos. Sophia Yin has videos posted about, desensitizing to cars and things like that. I mean, there's really good information out there about how to ease them into situations, and it really does work. Gus went through like a really weird time when he was a puppy, where he just decided he was afraid of the car, and so he was fine. He was like, fine, 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 fine. And then one day he just put on the brakes and was like, I am never going into that contraption again. And so we had to kind of slowly desensitize him back to the car. Now he loves the car. He jumps in. He's so happy. So you can
that's
reverse
good.
those things. They're not permanent.
Well, that's also nice to know there's always hope for all your pets. So if they have a bad
Yeah.
experience once, does not mean you can't, make it a
Yeah.
positive one later on down the line.
Yeah. Just
Um,
takes a little bit of patience, takes a little bit of reinforcement. And they have to just learn that like the greatest thing happens on the other side of that. That was doggy daycare. That was like,
yes,
yes, I go to doggy daycare. Now I love the car.
yeah, exactly. If it's always to the vet, they're not going to like the car very much. So too
Yeah,
bad.
right. No, you'll have pretty much
Poor
the
thing.
same issue with cats with their carriers, so you don't want to do that.
Yeah. So that's fair. I think when it comes to flying, I think most airlines, if you have a larger dog, are going to make you put it underneath um, in the cargo hold. I think that makes a lot of people nervous, myself included.
Me
I
too.
don't feel comfortable with my dog down there for a number of reasons. One, you hear every once in a while dog getting out on the runway, and my dog is not good enough to come back to me. And he is good enough to get out of a cage because he did it for many, many years. So
Hmm.
they are in a cargo, so make sure they're maybe they have to be comfortable in a crate. That's the big thing. Ideally, it have to be warm too because it does get cold down there.
Yeah.
So some things to consider if you are going to do that,
Yeah.
to make sure they have enough warmth down there. Sedating them down there makes me a little nervous.
And that's the thing is I actually think
Yeah,
you can't anymore because things have happened.
yeah,
You know, I guess for me, the thing that, and I know people do it safely every day, and I'm sure that more times than not, it works out just fine. But I think, even those times where people get stuck in a plane and they won't let you
mm-hmm.
off, and you know what I mean? Like, it's really hard on a dog if they're stuck in a crate for 12 hours on a plane, no, nothing to drink, not, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I,
Yeah.
I just, you can't control all those things. There's forces bigger than you at work at that point. So I guess, I mean, I don't know. I tend to be a little nervous. If I could avoid doing it, I probably would. I think you can pay for them to get a whole seat. I don't know.
On certain airlines. So like
Yeah.
the one I just took Loki on, I took actually Loki to Tahoe, and on that was JSX Airlines. Wonderful airline, by the way. Make sure you have a well behaved dog. Loki was a little bit drugged, and it made it a wonderful experience for all of us. Um, but like they have size restrictions and so forth. But like some airlines will let you consider that, like you said, they can buy a seat. You just have to be very careful and try not to ruin it for the rest of us, because unfortunately, I think that's what happened a little bit a couple of years ago during COVID. I think people started bringing like
Yeah.
all sorts of animals onto the plane. Like,
Yeah.
wasn't even a peacock that someone tried to get on a plane once? There was like a
I think that there started to be a lot of emotional support animals that,
yeah,
I think that there has been some abuse of that. You know what I'm
yeah,
saying? Like where it's like, oh, I mean, you never want to question because it is amazing what, comfort
definitely.
dogs can bring. And I mean, I get that, travel is very stressful. And so if you could have, your companion to keep you from being stressed. But that being said, I mean, you do have to expect that like a companion A service animal understands like when to use the bathroom, how to not bite people or like behave properly.
Yeah.
Now, people should also behave properly to them. And when they're working and they're not pets for us to go play with either. So it is a two-way street. But I do think you have
Yes.
to, I think there was maybe some abuse out there at one point in time where
Yes.
there were some
So
things that are like, I don't
yes.
know.
But we do respect people that do have like emotional needs because I understand like having your pet with you is definitely a comfort for a lot of people. So
Oh
we
yeah,
get
and
that.
I think when it's legitimate, it's wonderful that you have that as an
Yeah.
option, and especially like service animals, they're and you don't always know too. 'Cause some of them like help with like seizures, some of them help with, you know what I mean? Like there's
Mhm.
things that you wouldn't expect. They're not your run of the mill,
Yes.
sort of support animal. So yeah, no, I'm always very tentative to really have an opinion on that. Well, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt that it's legit. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I
So,
get that for sure. So that's one thing to watch out for when you go flying. And then as we kind of mentioned earlier with Hawaii, if you're going international at all, there are a lot more requirements with those health certificates. They may be a little more like vaccines are important, infectious diseases,
quarantine.
quarantine's a big part of it.
Mhm.
We get actually a lot of animals from like Thailand and Japan actually that fly in through San Diego, but unfortunately they seem healthy at the time, but usually like a week afterwards they come down with a really bad upper respiratory or lower respiratory disease.
Mhm.
So they'll get like a really bad pneumonia. So it's very important to get your pets checked ahead of time and understand there's gonna be a quarantine process. I think even like Australia, I think it doesn't have rabies there, but like their
Oh,
quarantine
maybe
process is
not.
like
Yeah, I don't know.
a couple months. Like it's a long time to get
Now, to
in.
be
So
fair, in some situations, the quarantine is actually like an at-home quarantine. So it's not like
yes.
they're not in a
Yeah.
facility the entire time. They just can't go anywhere. They have to
Yeah.
stay in their home
Yes.
situation.
Thanks for clarifying that because that's an important.
Yeah.
That's a very important point. It's not always outside the home. So,
Mhm.
but just things to keep in mind because it's an important part of moving or if you're just traveling, it's important.
Yeah, and understand that there's usually like a pretty big fee for doing the health certificates because they do take a lot of research, a lot of time. It's not just the exam that you're paying for, you're actually paying for the clerical work to get that done for you. So that is
Mhm.
something that I think, make sure you're giving enough time and that you're giving enough information. And then, you'd be surprised that there's some airlines that don't even like to go just from like state to state.
Mhm.
You don't even need, they don't even check the health certificate. And so many
Oh,
times I flew with Phoebe and they didn't. I mean, I used to fly back and forth from California to New York all the
no.
time with her. And
So
she was
a
a
little
decent
trooper.
flyer. She wasn't the best.
Yeah.
She wasn't the worst.
Well, that's good.
She almost got Paul kicked off of my husband. She almost got him kicked off of a flight once though.
Really? How did that
Mhm.
happen?
So she was good as long as you didn't close her head in the back, right? So she just had to have her head
Okay.
out of the back. I knew this about her. So I was really good because my bag that I would have her in, that big travel bag, was black. She was black brindle and my
Yeah.
coat was black. So I would just, as I walked by, terrible, but as I would walk by the flight attendant, I would just cover her. Like I'd throw my bag over my shoulder. So all they saw was the part of the bag. They had no idea that her head wasn't all the way down. Then I
Yeah.
would just put her under the seat in front of me. She was totally fine because her little head would be sticking up. And I would just rub her head and I would have my coat on my lap so you couldn't see that her head was up. So she was just happy as a little clam, head up, that ear sitting up. She was just super happy. And then I knew she'd be fine. And 9 times out of 10, the flight attendants would be like, "Oh, can I see your dog?" And they'd be super nice. But every once in a while, you'd get one that was like, "Is that head in the bag?" So I knew that you just want to cover her up, don't even say anything, and then nobody gets upset. Um, and then sometimes she would jump up on my lap, and then again I would just put my coat over her, and nobody knew that she was on my lap. This was always only the people next to me were cool with it. Like if they were afraid of dogs and they didn't want her there, then no problem. But she was
Yeah.
quiet. She didn't care as long as she could like feel my hand. She was fine. Well, Paul wasn't as practiced in that whole charade, and so he
Poor
had
Paul.
he had one of the flight attendants that was like, that dog's head has to be in the bag, and he was like, she'll be quiet if you can let it stay out. And that guy was like, basically like, we're gonna call the, police, and you're gonna be taken off the plane. And he was like, okay, shoved her head in, closed it. And if that dog did not scream on the top of her lungs, like, Phoebe had this like dying parrot sort of like cry that she'd be like, and I mean, if you know anything about like Frenchies and pugs, she was not suffering. She just wasn't happy. She wasn't getting her way and wanted her head out of the bag. And so, but Paul was like, well, I don't want to get thrown off of the flight. So I'm just gonna see what happens. And then finally, one of the other flight attendants was like, "Is there any way we can make this quiet down?" He's like, "Well, if you let me take your head out of the
bag." Victory for Paul.
So again, this is a really good, like, know your dog. If they don't like their head in the bag, maybe don't fly with them. I was young. It was not the best situation. But yeah,
we all learn, and we're sharing these experiences so you can learn from them too. So you don't make our mistakes.
Exactly. But there is a story of like that one Frenchie that died on a plane because they like made them put the dog up. When you can't, like, you do have to advocate for your pet. You can't do anything unsafe, and that's something I never would have done. You know what I mean? Especially a dog with a compromised airway. You just have to be so careful.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's I think the biggest thing, know your pet, practice with your pet beforehand, make sure they understand like these aren't new experiences for them as much as possible. It's tough with flying because you don't know until you get there, but do the things you can to keep them safe and happy. So,
and if your significant other is flying with them, warn them about those.
Which, by the way, is part of the reason we're doing myBalto in the first place. Having you be able to share your pet profile with people, is very important, because the number of husbands that come in that know nothing about their family dog is, one, hysterical, two, atrocious, because it happens all the time. Like, yeah, my wife told me to come in tonight because this is going on. Like, well, what disease do they have? Well, I don't know, and it happens literally all the time. So get myBalto. It will help you in these cases as well. So
wonder if we should do like a little like video history function where the wife can like record.
It's actually not a bad idea.
What's going on?
That's actually a really good idea. Guys, this is why we hired Sam.
You want to know, the thing is I was actually we actually had a day where like literally this happened every single appointment. I was like, so what's going on? They're like, well, we don't really know because they're not the one that gives the medication, or like, I don't know. He was like, well, she just lays out all the pills for me and I give them. So I don't really know what I'm giving.
Mm-hmm. It happens all the time. And that information is very important to your veterinarian. So get myBalto.
And it's not always the guy who doesn't know. I have had it the other way. I mean, it could be anybody, but the primary caretaker can't always be the one who brings the pet. So we need a video history function.
Yes, we're gonna work on that. It's one of the new features we'll have in like 6 to 8 months.
Exactly. But here's another thing about traveling: if you did have access to your dogs or cats, vet records and everything too, then no matter where you are, you always have them with you, which is really something that will be, I think, really, really important for people, because that's the other thing too. I mean, how many times make sure you have your pet's medications, make sure that you have everything that they're going to need, no matter their food too, because one of the things too is like abruptly changing their food, that can really, really put stress on their GI tract, and then you already have the stress of, hey, we've just traveled, we're in a completely different place, and now I'm going to feed you something different. That is a recipe for disaster. So trying to make a checklist ahead of time of like, hey, I have medicine, I have food, I have whatever we need to keep them comfortable, that their like favorite toy or whatever thing is going to ground them. It's a really good idea.
No, it's incredibly important. So can't stress that one enough. Like, it's helpful. Just wait. But part of the whole traveling business as well is also where you go as well, in terms of climate. I know a lot of people like to do outdoor activities with their pets, and I think that's great. I'm one of them, but just being cautious, like knowing your dog and a little bit like what type of dog they are. If they have a hard time breathing, maybe taking them to a hot area and going on a hike in the middle of the day is a bad idea, because you worry about things like heat stroke.
But I would say too, I think it's not only those like bulldogs and
Mhm.
The obvious breeds, you kind of, I think if you have one of those, oh, this dog may not be able to withstand a hike in the middle of the day in the canyons and,
Yeah,
wherever. But heat stroke can happen to any breed. So I
it
think
can.
too,
Yes, definitely.
right? I mean, like that's something that also like they're just not used to, they haven't worked up to, but even really anytime. It doesn't, I have had, before I was a veterinarian, I was like a dog walker and we would
Mhm.
take dogs up into the canyons. And I had a dog that had done this hike a million times, had heat stroke, and it was terrifying. So
Yeah, it's
you could say, because I mean, that's the kind of thing you see.
yeah, no, I agree. It's like I've seen a lot of times like the heavy exercises like the labs they'll just run back and forth for hours and you don't realize how warm they get until afterwards. So um
Well,
to
what are
just be
some
very
signs people
careful.
can watch out for?
Oh, sorry, I think I misheard you earlier. So the biggest thing is like panting over excessively, looking for water. If you see them start getting sick at all, so they're vomiting or having any GI signs, stop. Like they need to slow down because a lot of times that's the beginning of what we call like shock gut. That's the first organ affected in dogs when they're pretty much when their volume status is not appropriate, which means they're usually dehydrated because they're drinking or they're not drinking enough or they're too overheated. Their GI tract is usually the first place affected. So if they're vomiting at all or you're seeing diarrhea, stop what you're doing, go someplace cooler. Do not douse your dog in water, like in very cold water, because that can be just as shocking to their system. Cool them off. Have plenty of access to water when you go on those activities because those will be the first things you see. And then if they start like sitting down too much, they're tired. Like find a place to like rest in shade. There's a great trail called or great app called All Trails. I think many of you probably used it in the past if you like to hike. But a lot of times they'll talk on there like there's places for you to like shade. Find those trails. A lot of times they'll tell you like, hey, there's no shade on this trail, so don't take your dog on it. Read those consumer like feedback because help keep your dog safer longer because you want to find them shade when they're on those warmer hikes.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. I think, yeah, sometimes you don't even realize too, and if you get stuck somewhere and you don't have water and you don't have a
Mm-hmm.
place to take them, that can be really, really scary. And I remember this
Yeah,
dog got like couldn't even stand, like he got really like wobbly,
yeah.
and it was terrifying actually. Ended
Oh, it's
up
horrifying.
okay, but it was, yeah, it was very, very scary.
Yeah, they can get those heat stroke scares me more than most diseases do. So,
Hmm.
because they can just happen so quickly. And then at the same time, if it's warm out there, they can also burn their paws.
Oh yeah.
So be careful on black tops or any area that like the sun is beating down all day. Um, those are also important things to keep in mind, like wherever you're
And some
going.
breeds too can also get, they can get like sunburn on their nose. They can
Yeah,
get so.
yeah. So like having so like things you want to bring with your dog when you're on those type of hikes, even like cold weather hikes. Look up stuff ahead of time for what makes your dog as safe as possible. So if you're going somewhere cold, bring little booties for them if they're going to be in the snow. Like that's helpful for a lot of dog breeds because a lot of dog breeds aren't made for that weather. And even the ones that are, dog booties are still great. As we talked about earlier, get them used to it. Don't put them in dog booties the first time because
Oh
otherwise they're gonna walk like this the whole time and they're
yeah.
gonna they're gonna hate it. So
Hey, did you put dog booties on Loki, or was he fine?
he was fine.
Yeah.
Him and I have been to snow a lot. So but
I was gonna say,
I
I
thought
mean,
about it.
he is kind of built for it.
I almost did though, because honestly, like I was reading up on ahead of time, and there's even like a Vaseline type oil that you actually put between dogs' paws to make sure like they don't have those little snowballs get stuck in there.
Oh, that's good.
Um, yeah, so there's a lot of I highly encourage like I don't want to go over all the things, obviously. But it's really important to like find out where you're going, if it's whether it's warm or cold. Make sure you plan for your dog ahead of time, like having to have little harnesses that have their own stuff, like their own water, their own food,
Hmm.
if they're big enough. Don't do it to a Yorkie
A
because
Chihuahua. Yeah.
yeah, it's like ah. But yeah, just making sure you plan ahead of time. They need food on long hikes too. Those are really important. Like you can't just feed yourself. Trust me. So yeah, Loki
And
and I
then,
share trail mix. So
so do you ever see like what's the worst thing, like cold weather thing? I guess you live in San Diego, so I guess you probably don't see a lot of cold weather things. But
not so
what
much,
were
but
what
what
were
back
you
in
most worried
Michigan,
about? Hmm.
back in Chicago, we saw frostbite a lot.
Okay.
So they can definitely get frostbite. That's something, and they can get hypothermia, which is just when their body temperature is too low. We saw it with a lot of dogs who were sleeping outside in the winter.
Hmm.
Um, they'd come in, their temperatures would be like 92 degrees, 90 degrees. That's way too low for a dog. 99 is like where they should be. So um, just make sure you dress them warm, whether you're traveling or not. Just make sure they're prepared for the weather.
Yeah, yeah. And there is a range, 99.5 to 102.5 is perfectly normal dog.
Yes, exactly. That's good to
Just
know.
in
Like,
case you
because
take your dog's temperature, you're like, it's not. Just so you know,
no, but
there's a range.
a lot of
Totally
owners are doing
normal.
that these days, which is great. Like, I'm glad some owners are starting to take their pet's temperature a little more because
Oh yeah,
don't do it every 3 hours because they will hate you.
right.
But it's nice to check it once or twice a day if you're worried about them being sick.
Yeah, yeah. And also too, getting to know their gum color and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Making sure that you kind of know what's normal for your dog. Because if your dog generally has, like, probably Loki has very light pink gums, I would imagine, not
Yeah.
very bright, like Gus colored gums.
Mm.
So, I mean, if you never knew that, you might not know what's pale. You may not know what's like, oh, why is it so red? Or something like that. So it's always good to have an idea of what's normal for your dog.
Yeah, knowing the baseline is great. So it's and hopefully you're there with them long enough. But sometimes it'd be funny how many people don't look at their dog's mouth that closely. So
Oh yeah,
uh, it's good to know ahead of time.
it's true. I've had people ask me, "Oh, I just noticed that there's all this like dark discoloration in their mouth," and I'm like, "Well, that's pigment. That's been there their whole life, And you have
Mhm.
to show them like where to find the pink." But you're right, because how many people really lift their lips and actually look and you realize like,
Yeah,
oh, there was all this pigment there, and that's
yeah,
normal.
we've had that with dogs' nipples too.
Oh yeah,
Somebody else, somebody else was like, he's got a mass. I'm like, it's his nipple. It's okay. He'll be
yeah,
fine. So
yeah. Those are the best
dogs have them.
emergencies, by the way. Nobody should ever
Oh,
feel stupid coming in, because that was like one of my favorite things ever. I had this one client
yeah.
that was very sweet and was like, "There's something really wrong on my cat," and I was like, "Oh no, that's his nipples." And I was explaining him, and he was just so nice, and he's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." I'm like, "Why? This is great. Your cat's
This is the best
healthy.
appointment.
Here you go." That
Those
and a
are always the
reverse
best ones.
sneeze. I'm like, "No, they're not dying. It's a reverse sneeze. Go watch
Right.
it on YouTube. Bye."
Mhm. No, I agree. That's the best. Like those are the best ones because you're like, go home. I'm not gonna write a
Like, yeah,
record for this.
nothing.
My
It's
day's better.
perfect. Have a great day. I still have to write a
Yeah.
record, but go.
I put a little
I
communication. It's
never
like,
get
hey,
away
we
without
talked.
writing. Huh?
I get to write a little communication that says, hey, things were great. Small miscommunication. It's fine. So there, makes it easy.
So nice. No, I don't.
Uh,
Everything sucks.
and that's the way it should be done too. It's safer that way, and that way we don't get sued later. Um,
Don't do
which
your
is
yeah.
don't sue your pet. It's no fun. Um, oh, and last thing, flea and tick medications, especially
Oh,
if you're going hiking or stuff like that in the woods. It's really important to be up to date on those things. Don't give like the first day that day. Try and give a couple days beforehand for those type medications. And even I use for like really any dog, use a spray as well. Like I actually double up on the flea and tick preventive because those medications are super helpful and they do help. Keep ticks and fleas off your dog or cat, I guess if you're hiking with them, but that'd be new. Um,
you never know.
but sprays, yeah, exactly. You don't know. But sprays are also really helpful. It helps a lot keep the bugs off of them. So just fun things to keep in mind.
Well, that's interesting. What spray do you use? Because I feel like I've never really heard of one that's like super effective. So tell me what you're using.
Oh, I got this lavender one. It's like I found it at PetSmart. Our next podcast, I'll bring it on. I'll show you. It's
Yeah, I'm
not
curious
the one in Vegas.
because I've not really found anything that repels really well. You know what I mean? Like they
Mm.
still have to comb them off. You just check for everything after. It's important to have, you know what I mean? Like there's just nothing that really makes them pop off. You know what I mean? They have to take a blood
It's
meal in order to die, and you know what I mean?
yeah. No, so that's why the medication is still like the gold standard for me.
Oh yes, no,
But
you have to use the medication. You can't trust.
yeah,
No topical. Yeah, I mean,
yeah, I agree. That's
I just was curious to know if there is, because there are people around where I live that it's just there's just so much in the environment. So if you could just cut
yeah.
down the sheer number, it would be great. So anything that you have, I would love to be able to tell people
Yeah,
about
yeah,
it.
I'll pass it
That's
along because
awesome.
it worked for Loki last time we went. We do a lot of forest hikes, and like the first couple, I didn't have that spray, and he'd
Hmm.
have ticks on him. They weren't attached, but they would be on him.
Yeah.
And then the next couple times, I sprayed that on him, and that reduced him by like almost to nothing, which was really nice. So it was
Oh
helpful.
yeah, that's great. Yeah. No, that's perfect. Because I mean,
So
the flea and tick prevention they work awesome, but I mean, nothing's 100%. So just
mm,
lowering the chances is great.
exactly.
The other thing too, I would say is like what you were saying. Some places you don't need flea tick preventative. Like when I lived in LA, we didn't really have to use anything for heartworm. And
Mm.
so when I would go to New York, I would give it ahead of time and then for like the next month after. So like, you know what I mean? I think that you should know where you're going
Yeah.
too and like treat for where you're gonna be and not just what you normally do. So
Yeah, I
be
couldn't
extra
agree more.
careful. Yeah.
Yeah, because some diseases are more prevalent in certain areas of the country.
Mhm.
Even like leptospirosis, which is one that actually affect people too.
Oh, yeah.
It's more common in certain areas of the country. So yeah, just definitely, it's a good conversation to have with your primary vet when you move somewhere new. You want to establish care soon. Don't
Yeah,
wait
I would
forever to
say
do
before
so.
you move, have an idea and just make an appointment and get them in because the worst thing that can happen is you get there, life gets in the way, a couple of months go
Mm.
by, you have an emergency, and now you are just trying to find some place to help you out. And
Yeah,
that is not a good situation to be in. I know we're really sympathetic where I work. We really try to get people in when they need something, even if they're not a client, but it's like there's only so many of us. There's only so many appointments we can do in a day.
yeah, exactly. I think maybe it was your hospital, a couple other hospitals I talked to that they have a certain number of appointments reserved for like
Yeah.
pre-existing clientele, and then there's some that have just appointments like randomly, and some patients aren't even taking new patients anymore. So it's just good to know that stuff. Don't
Yeah.
wait,
Oh, there's a
essentially.
lot of places that aren't. I mean, a lot of
Oh
places.
yeah.
And we see a lot of places that even like established patients aren't getting in.
Oh
So,
yeah.
I mean, yeah, like we have been trying to be as helpful as we can and just like lower the burden for people who are just because there are just so many pets, which is awesome. But like, I feel like the last time they looked at like the numbers, it was like 1,000 pets for one veterinarian. And like in
Yeah.
human medicine, I think the number is like 300 to one. So, I mean, like, we are vastly outnumbered by pets. And so I think
Yeah.
as long as people can just understand that we're really doing our best, sometimes when we tell you something can wait, it's because it really can, and it's not because we don't want to see it. It's like, we have to deal with like emergencies or urgent things based on how urgent they are. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And to your point, your stat was actually pretty spot on. Before COVID, it was about 1,100 pets per doctor or veterinarian. That number jumped to about 1,500 during
Oh,
COVID
wow.
because the
Yeah.
number of veterinarians that retired because of just they were tired of it and they're like, I'm not going through COVID, like I'm done with it. And the
Yeah.
number of people that got pets, so just a bad,
So a
unfortunately, it's a
lot of
bad
things,
cross.
well, yeah, happen at once. And it
Yeah.
takes a long time to train a veterinarian, just like it takes a long time to train a human doctor, anything like that. I mean, we go to medical school, we have to have time to get a degree, go to school, get training, you know what I mean? So the
Yeah.
time that it takes you could want to do it, but like there is all this time, energy, and money that is spent per veterinarian to get them to the place where they can help the pet. So it's not, you know what I mean? It's not just a quick fix of like, oh, we just need
Yeah.
more veterinarians. It doesn't work that way. It takes a long time to get there.
Yeah. It's going to take us a good 10 years probably to get there, to be honest with you. So,
Yeah, but also too, I mean, there's only 33 vet schools. I think maybe there might be
yeah.
34 now if they open
They're
them up.
getting more now. They're starting to like build a couple more, and a few states are getting two now. So
Yeah, and the
it's
and the
it's getting
schools are taking more people, but not by that much because they can't. The facilities, they can't take. We have what 109 in our class.
yeah, about that. Yeah. And I
Yeah,
don't think it's changed that much since we graduated, just because
no,
you can't
there's
put
not
more
enough.
people in a room that yeah.
Doesn't fit it. Oh yeah, no, think
Yeah.
about the labs. Think about anatomy. We don't have any more
God.
space.
There's
Anyway, we totally get off the topic. But the point of the matter
yes.
is just do your due diligence ahead of time. Your
Mhm.
veterinarian's there to help you and will be so much more helpful if you're not waiting until 24 hours before you go. So, I mean, but
Yeah.
obviously things happen. If something ever came up and there was an emergency, of course, we always are super understanding.
Yeah. But yeah, as we kind of talked about, test drive things ahead of time in various means, whether it's medications, carriers, trips in general.
Yeah.
Get those health certificates early, and then just know where you're going and do some research, like prepare accordingly, because it's important for your pet and it's important for you.
Yeah. And feel free to ask your veterinarian if you don't know, like if there's something you need for that area. Most people will be like, they'll either answer it or look into it for you. I mean, I know that if anybody's trying to be proactive, I am like such their champion. I'll do anything I can to help them. Yeah, let's figure it out.
And that's why you email podcast@mybalto.com with any of your questions, because Dr. Sam is super excited. So
I do. I do like to be helpful. So if you have any questions particular to your pet that I can answer, great. Yeah, let us know, because we'd be happy to talk about it on the podcast too.
Yep. That sounds great.
All right. Well, thanks so much. This has been the Pause It podcast with Dr. Robert and me, Dr. Sam. Thanks so much for listening.
Thanks, guys.